All right, what's up, everyone? We getting ready to take a deep dive on the all-new striking on an article that was provided to us on Thanksgiving by one of the lead gameplay engineers for EA Sports UFC 3. And I will tell you right now, there are going to be a lot of changes that we are not accustomed to seeing in a sports simulation fight game. And I don't know if you ever played Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, or any other of those fighters where you have like a dial combo system. We'll get into that later, but combinations are going to change. Now, some of the key points that they went over in this long article were the damage system, stamina, combinations, stopping power, and frame advantage. That's also something that has been brought over from, previous fighters that we may not have seen in a sports game. Range management and defense. And we're really going to get into the combination and stopping power and frame advantage. We're going to explain that. All right, first up, we'll be looking at the damage system. They wanted us to know that this year is completely different from its predecessors. Strikes will now deal considerably more damage. And so that means to me, this is going to be a lot more realistic. These guys are in there fighting with 4-ounce gloves. It's not like boxing. You can't get hit in there, or any strike can lead to a knockdown or knockout. Another thing that they wanted us to know is that the damage system is different this year. You're going to have 3 meters that you're going to have to pay attention to. And those 3 meters are going to be your head, your body, and your legs. And those meters all deplete differently. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the main thing to note here, if you manage to land enough damage to fully drain any one of those meters, you will cause your opponent to be knocked down. How much damage you inflict on that final blow relative to how much health your opponent has will determine how severe the knockdown is. And here's where it starts to get fun. You got 4 levels of knockdowns. You got an active knockdown. That's the first least severe knockdown, is where your opponent gets stunned enough to lose balance and fall, but is able to quickly and automatically recover. So that's pretty much going to be an animation. You hit somebody, they're going to take this animation, they're going to fall, and they're going to recover. And they probably going to be in some health event. All right, the next level of severity is an alert knockdown. All right, and this is when you knock somebody down, and while they're on the ground, when you go to finish the fight, they'll be in a defensive position. So it says you'll land like in their guard if you attack somebody and fight there on the ground. So you got to think, if you knock down like a submission fighter like Damian Maia and he's in that alert knockdown, then you might want to just back off, because you don't want to go in his guard and then he puts you in an arm bar or something. So it's a little bit strategy when you need to determine, like, okay, I knocked him down, but based upon my fighter's abilities, do I want to go down there and finish the fight while he's in that position? Now, the next level of severity is the knockdown. And this is the one, where you knock somebody down and they're in a defenseless state and you try to finish the fight. But check this out. This is the new thing. They said you can finish that fight either by throwing strikes or attempting one of the new finish the fight submissions. So you know how when you knock somebody down and you get on top of them for the ground and pound, but now you're going to be able to do one of the finish the fight submissions, put them in the rear naked choke. So that's going to be interesting. All right, and then the final level of submission is the straight up knockout. So that's the most severe state, is the knockout. If you manage to knock someone out, the fight is over. So on that final blow, if you do enough damage, you don't even have to worry about going down in somebody's guard trying to get submitted. The fight's over. All right, and there's 2 other meters that we'll go over real quickly that we won't see, but they're in the game. One of them is the chin. Behind the scenes, there's a new meter that represents your fighter's chin. Every time you are stunned, rocked, or knocked down, your chin meter depletes. As your chin goes down, the amount of damage to reach the next level of severity for the knockdown reduces. So your fighter has a chin that you're going to have to be aware of, and they're going to have different attributes for that. Another meter that we won't see is the stun meter. And this is another new concept in EA Sports UFC 3. This meter is hidden from the player, represents the short-term damage or stun value inflicted by a strike. The depletion of this meter that changes the severity of the knockdown. So you'll have 2 meters that as behind the scenes that will affect, the knockdown state that you'll get into. All right, the next topic that we'll talk about real quickly, because it's a lot here, it's a lot of details, and I'll leave a link in the description, but it's vulnerability. And pretty much no matter what you're doing, it's going to be a counter for it. It's going to be somewhere that position and that movement is vulnerable. And as you can see, the damage can be multiplied up to 6 times if you successfully strike someone during a vulnerable state. And those states include even when you're standing still, when you're moving forward, side to side, head movement, ducking, kicks, blocking, and legs. So no matter what you're doing, even if you're blocking, it says you're vulnerable to the body anytime the arm on the side of the body is raised, leaving the body exposed. So you really need to understand what you're doing and what your opponent is doing so you can deliver the most advantage based upon his vulnerable state. And there's a lot of detail when it goes into, whether that is a certain punch animation at certain times. That punch animation is going to be vulnerable. Same thing for the kicks. So you want to, read this section and understand and learn each movement to see when it's most vulnerable. All right, the next 2 topics I'm going to kind of combine and go over them quickly is the health recovery. And you remember there are 3 different regions that will have a meter for: your head, your body, and your legs. So the health recovery for those 3 meters will operate independently. So let's start with the head. Your opponent's head is typically the highest of all damage regions. However, the head health recovers faster than all the other regions. So now let's talk about the body. The body damage is usually not as high as the head. However, body damage does not regenerate as quickly as the head does. And lastly, the leg damage is the lowest of the 3 in terms of damage. However, leg health does not regenerate at all, making legs attack the ultimate long-term strategy. So now leg kicks are going to be viable. If you get kicked in the legs and that meter depletes, you will not be getting that back at all during the entire fight. But with the leg kicks, if they're checked twice in a row, then the person throwing those kicks will receive like a health event. So you got to be careful. All right, the next thing they talked about is the stamina system. And one thing you got to realize that your fighter is going to get weaker as the fight goes on, and that's going to affect the damage that your strikes do. So I can see some of your favorite fighters, that has a lot of muscle and that's real violent when they first start out, like Yoel Romero. He's going to be very strong, and if you can survive that storm, then later in the rounds, he might be a little bit weaker. Now, another concept that they brought to the table is called a stamina floor. And the stamina floor is the lowest you can reduce your stamina to by throwing a certain type of strike. So a straight punch, hooks and uppercuts, and jabs is the one that's the most interesting. That actually has no floor. You can just let the bottom of your energy fall out just throwing jabs. That's how you got to think about it. You can throw them until your guy just can't throw no more, and you'll be extremely slow, and your strikes will be, little to like no effectiveness. And the last thing they talked about is stamina regeneration between rounds. So just like some previous Fight Night games, between the rounds is going to matter during the fight, just like real life. In this game, we'll actually have like a mini game, it seems like, where you have to determine how much of your stamina reserve that you're given at the beginning of the fight to use in between rounds. So you don't want to just use it all up, you know, unless you just think like, hey, I'm gonna knock this cat out in the next round. Let me, you know, rejuvenate my stamina. But then you got to think, if you don't knock him out, you're getting weaker and you have no reserve. And now a fighter that is probably less skilled than you can walk you down. It's going to be a lot of strategy in this game. I like it. All right, now starts the deep dive. We getting into some of the new concepts. The next one we're going to be talking about is stopping power. And this is a new concept introduced in UFC 3. And so pretty much each strike is going to have a stopping power value. And based upon how high that value is, the later in the trajectory of throwing that punch, it will stop your opponent's move. So let's say you have a punch with a low stopping power value. Well, in order for that move to actually stop an opponent, you have to hit that move very quickly. As soon as they do a movement to the left, well, you already need to be punching to that side. Now, if you have a move that has a high stopping power value, you can be a little bit later on that. It's a little bit more forgiving, because no matter when it lands later in that trajectory, it's going to stop your opponent. Now, the article goes in detail about different moves and what each one of them stops. So I would encourage you to read that, because it's a lot of information there. Just for an example, a straight punch to the head will always interrupt a forward moving strike. Now, just because one person's straight punch stops a forward moving attack easily doesn't mean the next person's will. I'm pretty sure everybody will have varying ranges of stopping power on each punch. So you need to understand your fighter and what your fighter can do. All right, now here's the big one. The next topic is frame advantage. And this is something that I feel needs a little prereq before they even introduce this section. This is something that is in all of the other fighting games like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Tekken. Like I told you, to understand the advantages and disadvantages of your character and what they can and can't do and what moves interrupt, like stopping power, other moves, we understand what the frame advantage is for each move. And so the prerequisite for understanding that is really to understand what is a frame in the first place. So I don't know if you ever heard of a game running, at 60 frames per second. It just only means that in 1 second, you will see 60 pictures. So let's say a move has a 3-frame startup. 3 of those pictures of those 60 seconds will be allocated to the animations of starting up. And then you may have active frames, the next frames after the startup frames, where those frames will actually be the frames that do damage. And then you have recovery frames, where those are the frames where after you're punching, he's actually pulling his arm back. So you can YouTube that, and I think that's a prerequisite to even starting to get into frame advantage. So, but that's just a very high level concept of what a frame is and what frame advantage is. So now let me get into a little bit more of what they talked about in terms of it being in UFC. So now that you got a good understanding and importance of stopping power, all right, EA UFC introduces an all new framework. This is totally new, man, that controls the amount of time that it takes for each of the following to occur when a strike is thrown, which I explained earlier. And I'm not going to go over everything, but pretty much you can get into the gory details, and hopefully when this game drops, every single punch, every single kick, maybe we can get a frame breakdown. And at that point, you want to sit there and determine, like, okay, a jab is only 3 frames. versus like a straight might be 10 frames. Well, I can get my jab off, startup, active, and recovery all in the time before somebody can throw that big long wind up straight. And based upon your stopping power, you're going to understand like, hey, well, can I interrupt that movement? So that's that whole analysis that's going to be going on now. That people that really dive into their character, understand the frames of each attack and each movement, are going to be able to have an advantage. So dive into this and look, every single scenario will be covered. Execution frames, recovery frames, and you got recovery frames on block versus if they land. Same things for kick. It's recovery frames if you block a kick. Okay, now how much time is it going to take for you to be able to control your character again, because it has to finish those recovery frames. And the recovery frames are going to be different if you land that kick or that punch or that strike. You're going to have less recovery frames before you're able to go into the next strike. So you got to understand that from a defensive and an offensive perspective. And that's the thing that is totally new in the UFC, and it's taking concepts from the 2D fighters and bringing it in. I want you to let me know if this is a good thing or if it's not. I'm used to games like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter. I play them all the time. So for me, I'm not going to say I'm going to be good at it, but it does bring an extra level of complexity that's always been in these other games now into UFC, on top of all the other difficulties that UFC has that these other fighters don't have. So this is going to be, to me, a very complex game. We have moved from chess to checkers. Not that we were even playing checkers in the first place, but now we throw a whole nother concept on top, and I'm gonna be excited to see what comes about when the demo drops in 3 days. All right, now this is the big one. Combinations have totally been redone. And if you're not used to games like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, you may not be used to this whole new concept that they have, for combinations. And this concept we call dial a combo, where you can put in a command sequence, X, triangle, square, and your combination comes out. Okay, that's going to be different than that timing system and the multiplier system that we were used to, based upon, UFC 2. All right, UFC 3, it's going to be more like you go get Sub-Zero. You got to learn his moves. Well, those won't be the same moves that Scorpion uses. Those won't be the same moves that Melina uses. So you're going to have to really understand, well, just because I got Conor McGregor and I threw, 2 hooks and an uppercut followed by a spin kick. Okay, if you go get Jose Aldo, that's not going to be his combination. His combination could be, jab, jab, uppercut, knee. And you're going to have to understand the differences between each fighter. All of these fighters going to have different move sets. And so it's just like, if I pick up Street Fighter, Ryu is going to have a whole different move set than, Zangief or Chun-Li. It's going to be like you picked up a brand new fighter and you got to go in the lab and you got to learn their moves. So I want you guys to tell me in the description, do you like this? Now, you can still throw whatever you want to, but it's just going to be, a lot slower. It's not going to be that crispy bop, 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 It's going to be totally different. If you want to get that nice juicy combo, you're going to have to understand the combo. Let me guys know what you think. This is a totally new concept coming to EA, man. Coming to UFC 3. It's going to be crazy. All right, in the next topic we just going to skim through the rest of these 2 topics. Range management. It's a new emphasis on movement thanks to the Real Player motion tech. Any action you perform can be done while standing still or moving. This opens up a whole new dimension of strategy, and understanding range management is critical to being successful with these new strategies. And so they talk about the 5 ranges: elbow range, punch range, kick range, step kick range, and out of range. So this one is a little bit more intuitive. Based upon your distance and your footwork, you know, in these other fighters, we actually call this footsies. And so this is where you're, you know, going back and forth and you're trying to get in your range that you want to throw a specific strike or a kick or, you know, takedown or whatever. And this is what the range management is called. They're just, to me, it seems like they're just replacing some old fighting terminology with their own, you know, UFC terminology. So range management would be what I described as footsies in like these other 2D fighter games like, you know, Tekken or Mortal Kombat. All right, and then next they talked about the defense. And the defense, I'm not going to get into everything. I'm just going to skim over the major topics. The main thing you have to know about defense, and they said let this sink in, parries are gone. Parries not even in the game. Just going to let that sink in. Okay, now, with that said, you're actually going to perform defense just like before. You got a high block and you got a low block. Only difference is now it seems like it's more like the Street Fighter games. R2 or right trigger will be your block button for anything up for your head. The high block is just holding R2. Kind of feels a little weird to me. Seems like it would have been like R1 maybe, but it's R2. And if you want to block your body, you hold R2 and L2. Another thing to note is that just because you block a punch or a strike doesn't mean that you're going to evade all of the damage. There is what they call bleed through. And that means that a percentage of that damage will actually still affect you even if you block it, just like in real life. You know, these guys got these 4-ounce gloves on. Just because they block it doesn't mean they don't absorb some of that damage. And also, if you just stand there and block, multiple strikes will break down that block until eventually those strikes are going to be coming in at 100% damage of whatever they can do. So you're going to have to depend on more than just blocking. You're going to have to use these lunges. You're going to have to use the slips, which are the last two categories. And just like everything else, the slips have undergone a complete overhaul. So now the slips are also tied to, you know, the frame data. And so based upon your head movement stat, some people slips in whatever frames, in those beginning evasive frames, they're going to be able to dodge all incoming, you know, strikes. Depending upon if it's not in a vulnerable position. So it's going to still be a lot more explaining to do, and we're going to have to find out when the demo drops. But basically the main takeaway here is all of the slip controls are tied to the right stick, and there are different type of slips you can do. You can flick the stick just to perform like a quick slip, or you can actually hold it and move and perform a combo and move it to the other side. And you can move while slipping, you know, so defensive fighters actually have a chance in this game, you know, and they may, you know, pose a problem. All right, and the last topic that they discussed were the lunges, final defensive mechanic that they covered. And they work similar to slips, but they're a little more effective at evading strikes, but it comes at a stamina cost. So you have to realize if you're sitting there using a lot of lunges, you know, for no reason, then you're going to be affecting your stamina, which affects the whole fight. And you remember the reserves that you have for in between the rounds. You're using up your reserves for lunging, so you have to be able to understand when to use it effectively. Now, there are basically 3 different type of lunges. There's the basic lunge, the advanced lunge, and the signature lunge. And each one of them moves you at a different, you know, spacing. They move you out of strike distance. So the basic lunge will move you 1 strike distance away, while the signature and the advanced lunges will move you 2 strike distances away. And not everybody will have access to the signature lunges, of course, you know, and you actually can chain combos off of these lunges, but it has to be in the move set, you know, which, you know, you can't take in consideration frame data and everything. So you see how all of this stuff is connecting together. Well, that's about it, man. That's just my high level coverage of this article. Watch out for the gameplay demo that I'm hoping that I'll get, and I'll be streaming that on my Twitch stream and my YouTube stream, and I'll leave those links in the description where you can find that. If you want to come through, discuss the game, you know, give me some information. Give me some information on what I should post on the channel about the UFC. Everything is welcome. If you learned anything about the video, had a good time watching it, please subscribe, please like it, please share it, post it on the forums. Anything, you know, will help us out. I think that this game is going to be something like we haven't seen. It's going to be something new to embrace. I'm up for the challenge, and it's something new and it's something fresh. And it, to me, it puts us up there on something that could be on a competitive level one day. So I like the direction that EA is going, and I'm excited to play the demo, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.